Adrian Wojnarowski broke early this morning that the Los Angeles Lakers are targeting UConn back-to-back national championship winning head coach Danny Hurley to be their next head coach. Jorge Sedano hosts ESPN LA, 7:10 in LA afternoons. He's going to be a part of our NBA on ESPN Radio coverage, and this is now the Progressive NBA Snapshot, a list of things from Progressive Insurance, home, auto, boat, motorcycle, RV, ATV. Progressive protects them all. Learn more about bundling at Progressive.com. So Sedano will be a part of the broadcast tonight. Boston and Dallas, and he joins us now. George, your initial reaction when you heard this morning Danny Hurley potentially to the Lakers?
Surprised. I think everyone was surprised initially. When you think about it, though, it does make sense that if you're going to go after a head coach and there's not anyone on the NBA level that wows you or that has the actual experience perhaps that you're seeking, you start to kick the tires elsewhere at the very least. And I think that for the entire time, Woj has said this thing is not close. And he was right. Like, it wasn't close. Like, they were still searching on what they wanted to do when everyone automatically assumed that they were targeting in on James Borrego or J.J. Redick. He kept saying, hey, this thing isn't over yet. I think there's still more to this, and here we are. And, look, for them, it makes sense, too, because if you look at what Hurley does at the college level, and I think that because I think there's some things he does particularly from a basketball perspective, that translate, I think that part makes sense. You look at his offense, it's very NBA style. A lot of threes, a lot of shots at the rim, a lot of ball movement, player movement, screens, dribble handoffs. Evan, I guess I guess you would understand this to some extent, particularly because the system at times offensively has looked a lot like what Eric Spoelstra and the Heat have done. So I think that makes some sense. Defensively, they're an incredible team. And I think that he's already kind of hinted that a college job wouldn't interest him. But the Los Angeles Lakers job, the crown jewel of the NBA, that changes the equation, and I think that's why we're here.
George, when we were talking about the next head coach for the Lakers, so much of the conversation was centered around LeBron James and what might be the best move for LeBron James as far as the head coach was concerned. With this move, as Woj has reported, they want Dan Hurley to build a program. This is going to be a long-term, massive deal. They want him to be a legacy head coach. Are you surprised that the Lakers went down that road if they are able to get this over the finish line, that this head coach would be beyond LeBron James?
No, that seemed to be what they wanted for the entirety of this search, Michelle. I think that they are trying to solidify themselves as a team that, hey, we have a head coach that and a system that we feel confident in. If you look at what the Lakers' job has been, and the last time I was on, we talked about this, it's been in flux constantly. I mean, they've been through, 5, 6 coaches or whatever it is in the last, maybe more actually, in the last decade or so. It feels like every 2 years they're turning it over. Even guys who won a championship, like Frank Vogel, got let go after a couple of years. So I think they're looking for some semblance of stability, because when you think of the Lakers back when Dr. Buss was running the organization, there was a level of stability, despite some of the stuff we've seen, that's been put on television about that era and whatnot. At the end of the day, they did have Pat Riley for a really long time. And they did have Phil Jackson even in 2 stints, for a pretty long time. So they had a level of stability, and I think that they've been seeking that in some way, shape, or form, and perhaps Dan Hurley becomes the guy that makes that happen for them.
George, we've seen college coaches that have been successful with amateur athletes make the step up to the NBA and not necessarily have the success that they were looking for. Billy Donovan with OKC. I mean, you're talking about John Beilein with the Cleveland Cavs, Calipari, Rick Pitino. The list goes on and on. I guess my question is, what makes this potential hire for the Lakers with Dan Hurley different?
Well, Canty, I think it's just what I was mentioning earlier. It's the fact that if you look at his style, like some of those guys you're talking about, and Cal's a great recruiter, don't get me wrong. But I think that Cal's style, if you look at it particularly, and I'll just use him as the prime example, He is great at finding talent. He's great at having guys fit a system, right? And if you look at it, those guys, the Kentucky guys particularly, and I know he's at Arkansas now, but when, he was at Kentucky, all those guys that came out, they were actually way better NBA players for the most part than they were college players because they had to play a role in college. And I think that's still true with Hurley to some extent, but I think schematically, he's better than those guys that you mentioned a second ago because of the type of style of offense and even defense to some extent that he's run. The generating threes, the rim attempts, like that is NBA basketball, okay? The off-screen stuff, the dribble handoffs, the DHOs, right? Like all the ball handlers moving, constant motion, setting screens. That's very much what the NBA does. I mentioned the Eric Spoelstra stuff earlier. I mean, you can go way back. Obviously, even before that, the Spurs ran a similar system with Pop when they were running the stuff with Timmy and Manu and Tony and even Kawhi. So that stuff that he's running is the type of stuff you will see in the NBA, more so, I think, than you've seen from other college coaches. So I think that plays a big role with it. And then, defensively, I think as well, he's run a lot of different styles of coverages based on, and he's adaptive to his players. Whereas other coaches in college, I think, are set to a specific system, right? And defensively, he'll run drop coverage, on pick and rolls with guys like Donovan Clingan, who's going to be in the draft this year. So he's done a lot of different things, even defensively, that I think could suit him in the NBA, and I think is attractive to an NBA team because he varies stuff up based on the talent as opposed to just running whatever it is he wants to run.
We're talking with our buddy George Sedano. Sedano and Cap, ESPN LA, 7:10 in the afternoons. He is going to be a part of our ESPN radio coverage of the finals, which, by the way, begins tonight. George is in Boston for the finals, Dallas at Boston. The dual timeline thing, it's something we've heard so much about in the NBA, right? The Golden State Warriors wanted to run the dual timeline of Steph, Clay, and Draymond with all of the young players, with Kuminga, Moody, etc. Kind of doesn't work, right? Danny Hurley, Sedano, feels like almost a walking, breathing dual timeline, meaning he can coach LeBron and he can coach past LeBron. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And that's, as Michelle was asking earlier, I mean, that's what the Lakers were seeking, some level of stability, because they haven't had it. And I think Jeannie Buss wants that to be the case. She wants to continue the legacy of her father. And I think getting that championship in 2020 was one step in that direction. But since then, there's been clearly some ups and downs. Remember last time I was on, we were talking about, you guys were asking me about JJ and that job. And I said, not that JJ needs my opinion or has sought it out, but I said that job, that's a challenging job, man. Like, it can be a mess. It's been a little bit of a mess there. And I would say the same thing to Dan Hurley. Be careful what you're stepping into because that job has swallowed up a lot of people. But if they are truly willing to give him the leash here, then I think that it could potentially work out. But I don't think it's definitely something that will work. I mean, we don't know. I mean, we have to see, to your point, how he adapts to the NBA style because, Candy's point earlier makes some sense. There are other guys that have tried this and hasn't worked. I think Hurley is better suited for the reasons I illustrated earlier because of just the way that he conducts his program, particularly on the floor. But, I mean, the thing you can't account for, and Candy probably knows this as well as anyone because professional sports are different. He's going to probably get this rich contract, but there's a lot of players on that team that are going to make more than him. And that's a different deal that you have to get used to. So do I think that it could be that? Yeah, I think it could be. I think that's what the intent is with this particular hire. We'll have to wait and see if it works itself out that way. I think he's set up to do a nice job from a basketball perspective, but can he handle the other stuff? We'll see. I don't know. We'll have to wait and find out. Not a great answer for you, but that's to say. But interestingly enough, I do remember J.J. Redick actually had Dan Hurley on his podcast, The Old Man and the Three. And when he tweeted out a clip, LeBron actually was very approving of Dan Hurley. I don't remember specifically what he wrote, but he said something like, he's so good or something like that. So I'm curious to see if when he wakes up this morning in L.A., if he doesn't have already a semblance of what could be transpiring, how he feels about the potential hire.
George, real quick before we let you get